says, but it's impossible to do this stuff. That's why he didn't do it in a targeted way, because nice people who are very organized and do things very carefully do not take on the entire country and the entire and the entire Wall Street.
Companies, small businesses, they are right now, Trump's talking about transition. They have been given no time to transition. They are looking at their inventories and saying, we're out of goods, we got to get more from China. It's going to cost us 2 times what it cost us a week ago.
Yeah, so look, there's no doubt the transition is going to be bumpy, but I think what you're pointing out is so true. Trump matches strength with uncertainty. That's a negotiation tactic, and you brought
2 months is a pretty big achievement.
Where's
coming from overseas.
But like, could you go through some examples? Because Stellantis just said they're closing
$50 billion.
1,000 steel jobs were created. 75,000 jobs that rely on steel were lost. Those are the facts.
Yes, absolutely.
The Peterson Institute.
They saw this whole week was a president willing to go out there and fight for the forgotten men and women of this heartland and take on the entire international global order.
First of all, you can't.
Hello, everybody. Guys, let's get right into this clip. There's a lot to get to, but I thought this segment was fantastic. A lot of different points are made. Let's get right into it, and we'll talk about it.
In the meantime, though, I think the question is, why on earth didn't they just say to these countries, hey guys, we're serious about this. If you don't come to the table in the next 30 days, this is what's going to happen. We want these deals. They didn't actually say that, and now they're doing it after the markets are literally flipping out and starting to say, we're not so sure that the United States of America is a safe haven for our money anymore.
Here's the way I think they're thinking about it. It feels like the direction they're heading in is that what Trump basically wants is for our allies to consume a lot more of our products and for China to produce a lot less of what we consume. And so I think what he's going for is a kind of soft global embargo on China. And the way that he went about doing that is he basically picked up a baseball bat and said to the entire global elites, that's a really nice stock market you've got. It would be a shame if anything happened to it. And the reason that I think that that was effective is, I mean, Lutnick is saying that they could never have gotten such good deals if that pressure that you're actually describing wasn't there. But I think that that was more designed for a domestic audience. And the reason that I think that is this, I've been thinking a lot about the 10 million Americans who lost their homes in the 2008 financial crisis and how President Obama's first act in office was to give $700 billion to the banks that caused it, including $30 billion in bonuses to the crooks who organized it. And I'm thinking about how those very Americans saw a president pick Wall Street over Main Street, and what they saw this whole week was a president willing to go out there and fight for the forgotten men and women of this heartland and take on the entire international global order.
First of all, you cannot say soft in baseball.
I gotta say,
Hold on.
the whole thing here.
That's why she smirks there, because she knows what she's saying is so stupid. Of course, talk well about Trump and then bash Obama. How convenient, exactly what Republicans like. And she tries to play it off like she's a centrist, she's right down the middle. I trust them even less than Republicans. Right, the richest, the president who hired the richest man in the world to cut everyday Americans' jobs is caring about the middle class and lower class Americans. Including, this is the party that's trying to cut, as we speak, Social Security benefits, calling it a Ponzi scheme. Fraudsters are the only ones that complain about their checks, making it harder to get those your benefits. Really?
I don't know. Lots of people in the heartland have 401ks.
That's right.
They have jobs where they work for a company that is thinking of now laying them off because the supply chain is impossible. The idea that he's taking on the global elite when he's offering a giant tax cut to the billionaires, I'm sorry, makes very little sense. He's not a fighter. No, he's not. He's giving them a massive,
Richard's head is going
and
to
also,
explode. Go ahead,
just
Richard.
costs are going up.
I love the way the right and the left at some point will both claim Wall Street versus Main
Well,
Street.
I think she's literally somewhere between the right and the left.
Exactly. But
in
the
one
point
human.
is, it's the same thing. Wall Street is Main Street and Main Street is Wall Street, and they affect each other at different points in different ways. Companies John Deere sells to China. Therefore, if China's tariffs are screwed, John Deere gets screwed. You can't divorce it. It's not that straightforward. And by the way, we bailed out the banks back in 2008, not because we wanted to, because we had to. Because if we hadn't bailed out the banks, the whole thing would have come crashing down. So let's not have any halcyon view about that.
And I'll just
But
say,
I
a
think
lot
that
of Democrats did not like the bailout of the banks that Obama did.
I thought that would be like a unifying point.
The idea that no one paid any consequences
I know, it was
for
ridiculous. That's
for
what
the last recession is absolutely ridiculous, right? So she's right about that. The problem, though, is that what Richard is pointing out and what you're pointing out, which is Americans are going to bear the brunt
Yes.
of what is happening
The middle
on
class is
Wall
gonna
Street.
pay for these tariffs.
Companies, small businesses, they are right now, Trump's talking about transition. They have been given no time to transition. They are looking at their inventories and saying, we're out of goods, we got to get more from China. It's going to cost us 2 times what it cost us a week ago.
Yeah, so look, there's no doubt the transition is going to be bumpy, but I think what you're pointing out is so true. Trump matches strength with uncertainty. That's a negotiation tactic. And you brought up a very good point. Well, why do we have to go through this route? Because for 20 years, no one else had. Countries weren't coming and saying, hey, let's talk about renegotiating something. He had to put the gauntlet down and say, you're all in this kind of together in terms of what we're going to renegotiate. We're not just going to pick on this country and this country. We're going to renegotiate, frankly, with the sole purpose of putting China in a box. And let me tell you, China's in trouble right now, and they know it.
You talked about
Can I just
messaging
say-
other Republicans. Let's just call a spade a spade. The last 5 days, there has not been alignment in the Trump administration on what the actual plan is on these tariffs. It's been to uncertainty, strength.
So clearly the market
Honestly,
crashed harder, and
yeah.
countries came to the table faster.
The funny thing about the
I don't think
uncertainty is that the
messaging is our
uncertainty.
All right, I need to talk about these damn tariffs. These people act like, first off, not only because of inflation that was already present before these tariffs, but on top of the tariffs, consumer sentiment is at a 12-year low. Last time I saw it. Any promotions that were planned, gone. Any expansions, gone. Current businesses will be shrunk down. And in this case, I would say forced, because they will literally become a smaller company. It's simple economics. The higher the price of goods, the lower the demand. Right? Like less products being sold means less people need to facilitate the selling of said products. It's simple. And I hope Republicans are hearing this defense. They're still willing to defend Trump. They just cannot be trusted with the economy. They're too much of cultists. They're too weak. They only care about their relevancy in the Republican Party, and that means bending over for their cult leader, Daddy Trump. I don't ever want to hear about Republicans are better for the economy. They know this is foolish. They know how ridiculous this is. It's hard to find any economist that agrees with the way Trump is doing this. This is going to hurt lower income and working class people. And the only ones that won't feel it or barely feel it is the super rich. What a surprise.
Might actually be the reality of the situation where they don't know where this is
Here's
going.
the problem. Here's the problem with this whole strategy, which is the people he's taking hostage with his negotiating is not like really necessarily other countries. It's the pocketbooks of the American people who are going to pay more. Even with the 70 countries, there are a bunch of countries that tariffs are on now, 10% across the globe. As I said, China, Mexico, and Canada.
25%.
Like what Canada, exactly. What did Canada do? Lots of trade there. We're going to all pay more.
With a massive
But,
trade deficit on a lot of different products where we get screwed on
The
price.
trade deficit doesn't
Absolutely.
even make
Come
sense.
on, Chris, come on.
Honestly,
Let's not have
it's
this.
false. That's a ridiculous
let's
thing.
not.
You
Go
know
ask the
trade
dairy
deficit-
farmers of New Hampshire
hang on.
that
The U-
they have to
this
pay
is-
200% of a tariff going into Canada.
Richard,
It's a joke.
The USMCA negotiated
By Donald Trump.
Well, on the back of NAFTA, has created this phenomenal phenomenal free trade zone, which has some imperfections, but is by far and away created huge wealth for all three countries. And by the way, this idea that you could, they had like the Howard Lutnick thing, they had to do it this way. It's a wonderful truism that we can never disprove.
Is China putting manufacturing and factories in Mexico to get into
So Mexico and Canada,
Yes.
because of the USMCA, are a sort of backdoor into the American economy, right? Because what happened was China just started building car manufacturing plants in Mexico to avoid the tariffs. So what's the answer to that? Trump's answer is very clear. Mexico and Canada have to match our tariffs on China. Otherwise, there's no point in doing them. What's your answer to that?
Who negotiated USMCA? Who negotiated?
And then there was a backdoor loophole that was taken
What's your
advantage of.
answer to that backdoor
So he was
loophole?
wrong.
It's the same backdoor loophole. It's the same backdoor loophole that the European Union has with the UK and Southern Ireland, or the Irish Republic. It's a well-known strategy. You put in place protections against it, which they did not properly do.
So they're doing it now. I mean, like, what's the problem? So you're agreeing that we should do this.
If you perceive that to be a weakness, fine. But in the same process, don't destroy the triple market that has been created.
There was just a different way to do this. There just was. I'm not saying what.
But nobody
Including
did.
Donald
Nobody
Trump. I'm
wanted
just saying. No.
Americans to pay
I'm
so
not
much
even
more.
saying. I'm literally just saying. The hatchet that he took to the market without feeling like there was a plan. The strident poor Carolyn Levitt. Oh, we aren't doing this. We aren't doing this. And then the next day, like, you guys don't understand the art of the deal. No, honey, you don't, okay? Because that was not a deal that he was making. He saw the stock market was plummeting, and his allies, the people who helped fund his campaign, were like, Donald Trump, you are ruining this economy. So what you were just saying might be true, but that didn't mean he had to take that hatchet to people's 401k, to the markets, to the economy. There was a different way to do it. And I think, and I said this in the last segment, and you may be true, this may be right, I think if he would have really directed and targeted his approach towards China, there would have been a path for some bipartisan agreement. But the reckless approach, there is no place to really agree with that because it caused harm. And again, there feels like it's just like this pain. Again, where's
Do you think
the
we knew the market was going to drop 10, 12%?
The moment you throw the 51st state, Chris, the moment you
maybe he shouldn't have done it then.
the
Maybe
moment you
that was a
throw the 51st state in, and you throw Greenland in, and you throw all those truly offensive pieces of behavior, then you start to weaken your arguments.
Can I ask you a question?
Running around with a chainsaw, cutting everyday working people's jobs.
Though
Yes.
Donald Trump seems obsessed with this sort of retro view of American manufacturing, that he can just turn the clock back, he can turn up the tariffs on the rest of the world, and then all of a sudden, like magic, what will pop up are factories where, I guess according to Howard Lutnick, Americans are going to be putting little tiny screws into iPhones and making good, six-figure incomes to sustain their families. The truth is that is not going to happen. And why won't Donald Trump tell the American people the truth about what the future holds, which is robotics and AI, and that some of these things we really should not be manufacturing here?
It's a very important question. He has already gotten $1 trillion in manufacturing committed, so it is already working, and he says there's more coming, but even that number in 2 months is a pretty big achievement.
Where's the
Coming from
trillion
overseas.
coming
From
from? Yeah, but could you go through some examples? Because Stellantis just said they're closing plants.
$50 billion in
Microsoft-
Louisiana on LNG.
Microsoft just announced that they were closing a variety of plants just in the last week. I just want
to address this question first because I think it's a really
She has no examples. This is their new talking point. We have all these commitments. They had commitments last time Trump was in office, and they never followed through. Because they don't have to. It's just a commitment. Oh yeah, I'm going to do it. Just to shut up the orange idiot child, petulant child that Trump is. They're placating him.
really important point. We actually probably all agree that there are certain things that for our national security, we absolutely have to be manufacturing.
100%. I think everybody agrees on that.
Pharmaceuticals, ships,
chips,
steel,
all of that
aluminum,
Yes.
microchips. Steel and aluminum, Trump slapped 25% tariffs on China on them in his first term. And the price went up for about 4 months, and then it came right back down because we have a very healthy free market economy within America. And the average steel worker, who works, by the way, in the South, so these are in right-to-work states, these are not union jobs, makes $88,000 a year. This is why manufacturing is so coveted.
they also let the
And so
Ohio,
I
where
guess
it
my
used to be
question
the
to you, Abby,
steel,
would be, so we all acknowledge that this manufacturing has to be done here.
I get that.
So
but,
where's the disconnect?
But those targeted, I mean, even if you, I'm not going to pass judgment on the Trump 1.0 tariffs. It's complex, right? But even if that were the case, those are much more targeted than what he is trying to do right now. And what he's trying to do right now is like slap tariffs on toys coming out of Vietnam as if that is like the future of American manufacturing when it's not. And those things are not as important for our national security. And all they do is raise prices on everyday Americans. I think that's the part that I'm not understanding.
Well, right now, there's only a 10% tariff on Vietnam because that's the standard across for 90 days.
But I'm talking about what he announced on the so-called Liberation
But they
Day.
have said, Vietnam has said they're going to drop their tariffs to 0. So the thing about Trump is he loves tariffs because he thinks they do a lot of things. They protect our national security. They reshore manufacturing. They raise revenues.
But tariffs do not reshore manufacturing.
They raise
Exactly.
revenues.
They do not.
They raise revenues.
Tariffs by
They raise revenues
themselves.
by
Tariffs
making
by
Americans pay
themselves
more.
do not reshore
They do
manufacturing.
over the
You have to
short
also do other things to
her
encourage
point,
manufacturing
when
in the
Trump put
country.
the original tariff on China, during his first term, $30 billion new steel plants in Arkansas, state-of-the-art steel plants being built in Arkansas.
Look at the research.
Great.
1,000 steel jobs were created. 75,000 jobs that rely on steel were lost. Those are the facts.
Yes, absolutely.
The
That is a
Peterson
fact.
Institute.
Look how he just looks away. He has no answer for that. And guys, this is the hard truth that they're just going to avoid here, is that China is willing to throw their country into economic depression. If necessary, they'll even have more sweatshops and even more slave labor over there. We're just not willing to do that here, nor should we. We should not be okay with that. I don't agree with China whatsoever on their labor practices, but this is the reality. They also have about 4 times the population. We just can't win that manufacturing game with those variables. We just can't compete with them when it comes to that sector of the economy. But you know a way that we can and we have been for decades and decades? Allies. We had most of the global economy as allies and good trading partners. You don't fight back against China alone. There's just no chance in hell. Not in manufacturing. You can't keep lying to people. And the truth is, unless we're willing to have that kind of labor practice over here that China does over there, child labor and sweatshops, and increase the population by 4 times the amount, it just ain't gonna happen. And you know how else you fight back against this? You educate the population further and further by funding and incentivizing people to get educated on the jobs of the future and the jobs of today. It's probably not the smartest to constantly attack education as these right-wing and Republicans do on a constant basis and close down the Department of Education. We have been successful through innovation.
Institute has well and truly documented steel tariffs, solar panel tariffs, all of them from the first administration. And yes, there were certain gains, important gains. There were also heavy losses. And there's a reason. No country does this in this particular way because historically it hasn't worked. The country doing the general tariffing always loses in the end.
This is why Donald Trump won. Because people sit around saying the things we all agree should happen are impossible.
Donald Trump won. Go ahead, continue.
I'm just saying, like, we all agree on the goals.
Yes,
we all agree that targeted tariffs are good. We all want to reshore manufacturing for specific
targeted tariffs.
And then you sit around and everyone says, but it's impossible to do this stuff. That's why he didn't do it in a targeted way. Because nice people who are very organized and do things very carefully do not take on the entire country and the entire country class and the entire Wall Street on behalf of the forgotten working class of this country.
Will we please stop this?
And guys, did you catch that there? she said that that's why we all agree that targeted tariffs are the way to go. Why can't we agree? And then she said literally 5 seconds after, that's the reason Trump didn't go with target tariffs, because you don't get anything done. Like, this is insane. They have to spin themselves in a pretzel. They have to literally say one thing and contradict themselves literally in that same sentence, because it doesn't make sense. There is no defending the approach with this. Targeted tariffs is one thing for certain industries we want to protect. You don't just do a blanket, all allies, all whatever so-called enemies. This is just insane.
Forgotten working class.
We will not, sir. We will not,
I'll
sir.
tell you why. Because everything is everyone.
forgotten by the Democrats.
No,
No,
nonsense.
only forgotten by the
Everybody in
Democrats.
some shape or form, is part of a working class, either historically, today, or whatever. And every one of us, in some shape or form, lives in an economic environment where we are aware of what is happening in our own areas. But this idea that somehow it's Wall Street versus Main Street, and Main Street doesn't care about Wall Street, and Wall Street just
Small
wants...
Democratic
Can I just
sisters,
say-
stand with
can
me.
I
Like,
just-
this is
let
the
me,
left.
let me just say,
I mean,
let me just
I
say here,
will
I'm
say-
gonna, she asked for me
Okay,
to come
go
in.
ahead.
Let
Yeah,
me
she's
just say.
calling.
I think the challenge of this is that I think we all have to be clear. I am very focused on middle-class families and the cost squeeze they face and the challenge between incomes and costs. And I just think you should acknowledge that when you're asking middle-class families to pay $4,400 a year from just the tariffs that we have in place now, that you are asking a lot when incomes aren't going up. And that I just think it should be clear to everybody in America that these tariffs are going to hit Main Street, they are going to hit the South, the North, the East, the West, because we are all going to pay more.
I also-
But Trump
And
is
you
saying-
might say,
but
and just let me say,
I gotta
transition
let-
costs
No,
seems
Governor,
a
but
little
Trump
has made it clear-
transition costs.
These tariffs
He's been actually quite patient. Go ahead.
Trump has made it very clear it is not the strategy to keep these tariffs in perpetuity. He's using them as leverage to drive the better deals, to make sure the loopholes are closed, whether it's in Mexico or Vietnam, which abuses it terribly. He's forcing everybody to the table. He's saying that we are all, and the first ones you're going to see will be Vietnam, India, Japan, Australia.
I just have to say, in the
Korea.
election,
10% tariff stays.
Oh,
Do you want to put your hand to it?
bet?
10%.
On which on who?
No,
Across the world. That's what's happening
the
right
10%.
now.
So what you're really
That's what's
betting me is
happening now.
how many countries will negotiate out of it over the next 90 days.
I just have to say, I don't think
Actually, I
that
think
working
what-
people want wagers on their lives like this.
Well, I think
this is
what
the
Richard
point.
is asking, I think this is really important, right? Donald Trump is going to say he's going to strike a bunch of deals with these countries. Richard is suggesting, am I right, that you think that at the end of the day,
It'll stay.
regardless of what the deal is,
stay.
the minimum tariff on the whole globe
Yes.
is probably
I
going
think
to be
that
close
you
to 10%.
may get certain exceptions on free trade areas, isolated cases, but Donald Trump philosophically, historically loves tariffs, and if he can get a general 95-98% tariff of 10% across the globe, he will consider that to be a tremendous
Are you
victory.
expecting free trade across the world?
No, no,
0%?
wait,
I would love
wait.
that, but no
He
one
has
that's
set
not
a new
practical.
floor.
I just
He has
have
set a
to,
new
I
floor.
have to say something about this working class thing. As someone who has worked for Democrats and who has voted as a Democrat, I acknowledge that this past election, we were not listening to voters saying that things were too expensive, even though the data was saying that things were too expensive. And I find it very interesting that just 5 months later and only 2 months into this term, that doesn't seem to be the message that Republicans are hearing. It just feels so distant from the critique on Democrats to then say, just suffer a little pain.
You're a
Oh, you can
transition
endure
You're a
your
transition
401k, your 401k.
It's a
That
good point,
is
but that's
not-
because
that is-
inflation actually hasn't moved yet. Inflation isn't skyrocketing today. People aren't feeling it.
There's another response
They
to that, I
aren't.
think,
The
which is-
Americans still don't feel like inflation is too high.
Not
I guess
on tar- not on tariffs.
But it doesn't matter. But I'm saying, what I'm saying is the totality of the experience. Their lives, they don't feel like their lives are any better today than they were on November 5th when they decided the Democrats weren't delivering the deal. And what they're being told now is that just endure it a little bit more. That's not what Donald Trump said on the campaign
Price
trail.
increases.
And that feels disconnected
decreases
from the
on day
critique
one.
of our
Price
party.
increases and shortages could be on the horizon, which is very real for many Americans. And actually, I think in some ways the shortages might be more significant than the price increases. I want to play actually.
And I think I read something that it was like 30% of the products we get or consume, something like that, are from China. That's over 100% increase on that. And we did get affected by these tariffs already. I was trying to order the pre-order the Switch 2. We can't do that anymore. It's a delay on the pre-order because they're trying to figure out, you know, how to navigate with this whole tariff thing. So that's bull.
Something that Batya said over the weekend on Fox News that I think is an interesting part of this conversation. Let's play it.
Oh no.
Oh dear.
Oh dear.
It's not just the destruction of the economic vitality of the working class, but there has been a spiritual decimation that has come along with that. A crisis in masculinity because we shipped jobs that gave men who work with their hands for a living and rely on brawn and physicality off to other countries to build up their middle class. So
Yeah.
Donald Trump is simply saying no more to this and to the crisis in masculinity, which is, of course, why young men feel so attracted to what he's offering.
I rebuilt my own floors by myself this year. I just want to, I felt very masculine about that.
There's no
myself, so
crisis of
taking credit.
manufacturing in the Sununu household. It is an interesting theory, though. I mean, and I think there's some truth to it, that that this actually declining portion of society, they're looking at what their fathers had and what their grandfathers had, and they're saying, we can't have that anymore, and it's not fair. Those people are being asked to move into an economy that perhaps they're not educated enough to move into. But I guess my question is the rest of the economy worth sacrificing for that some 8% of the American economy, which is where we are in terms of manufacturing?
So for the last 60 years, our economy has been an upward funnel of wealth. From the working class, the middle class, which in the 70s was the largest share of the wealth, was in the middle. And today, the top 10% control over 60% of the GDP. Not the top 1%, not the billionaires, the top 10% controls over 60% of the GDP. The working class has been left behind from the immense prosperity that this country generated, which is why GDP as a measure for success is not a good measure, because it measures the aggregate. So for example, when you have a sort of decriminalization of illegal border crossing that we had over the last 5 years, a policy that allows millions of people to come in and start working, they are then undercutting the wages of working class Americans. Now the GDP will go up by leaps and bounds because low wage slave labor, it makes rich people much richer, but it really hurts the heartland, it hurts young men. 7 million young men are not in the workforce. You cannot have a society like that where some people are getting so unbelievably
But some
wealthy
of those
and
jobs
people
are
getting
never
left
going to
behind.
come back to
No, but
human
you're right.
hands.
You're absolutely right. And
That's exactly, Ashley's completely right. These jobs are never going to come back. Stop lying to these people. And this is just insane to me. It doesn't matter. This means nothing, no matter how many jobs we bring back, if the rich doesn't pay their fair share. She just said it. They have all the wealth. We have to get rid of tax evasion. We have to increase the tax rate on the super rich. Lower taxes for the middle and the lower class. Punish tax evasion with severe fees and jail time if necessary. F that. Because again, what does it matter if we bring so and so jobs back that pay $80,000 a year? And if we educate the entire country that more than half the people have PhDs, if people aren't getting paid enough to buy a house, to pay or simply pay bills and have a vacation once a year, like we will mathematically never get there as long as there are a small percentage of people sucking up all the wealth and then evading taxes on that wealth and paying a fraction of what me and you pay. 400 richest family paid an average of an 8% tax rate.
And it was the failure that we failed in the first .com revolution when we told people that there would be reskilling. We failed in the second industrial revolution. We are failing again in the AI industrial revolution. We are not putting enough money into reskilling, re-equipping, retraining. There's going to be, the blue-collar worker that lost out in the 90s and noughties and now it's the lower, if you like, white-collar worker that's losing out, and we are about to repeat exactly the same
Isn't this
mistakes.
a failure of our politics, though, to
Completely.
actually solve the real problem, which is that we are just abandoning people and not
Yes.
actually training them for
Yes.
the actual
Yes.
economy that we exist in?
It's beyond politics,
I don't
though, right?
understand
It's
why
culture.
it keeps getting. It keeps getting kicked to the markets when really what it is that we don't care to invest in schools. We don't care to train workers. We don't care to do any of the things that would actually get these folks ready for a real economy.
I'd like to know from the governor, isn't it, we all want to do it, but it's very expensive and it's very difficult.
To train people?
So,
But isn't
so
it-
what you do is, if I may, in New Hampshire, for example, we partnered with those manufacturers and they made the investments to build the schools. But the problem was getting the students, and you have an entire culture and generation that was told, you don't want to be a plumber, you don't want to be a manufacturer. And so that culture of America, where we put that aside and denigrated it to our own detriment is huge, and breaking through that is really
How
important.
do tariffs fix that problem?
See,
then?
this is
right?
I
Like,
think,
that's
the
what
right
I'm trying
point.
to.
It ensures the long-term
Look,
manufacturing job.
You and I can agree on career technical education and ensuring that our high schools are training people for opportunities that are not just college. I do think that's really critical. I also just think we have to be clear that one of the reasons why for 20 years people weren't doing these mass crazy tariffs or very large tariffs is, again, because I think middle class people look at both incomes and costs. We saw that over the last 4 years. People are hyper focused on costs and prices. And we had a good inflation report today, but every economist is saying, as is Jerome Powell, these tariffs will be inflationary. They will raise prices. So I say to you, it is
I wanna
absolutely
answer
the
that. I
case.
wanna answer
We
that. Wait,
absolutely
I wanna
care about
just-
these
I wanna
things.
respond to
To your point about men working with their hands, some of those jobs just never are coming back because they're done with robots, and the robots' hands do that. And so, like, no matter how much we try to, and so we have to figure out what we're doing with those men and women who just will never have those jobs again. I agree that there was a push in my generation, go to college, get all the student loan debt, all of it, right? It's about choice, right? It's about being like, you can be a plumber or you can be a doctor. It's just not saying one part of the community has to be a plumber when everyone else can be a doctor. And we don't do that across the board. We put people based on their socioeconomic in the zip code they're born into, and we used to funnel them in. So in an overcorrection, we were like, nobody be a plumber. And so it's a both and I think that if there was the courage to actually really get innovative and think about it.
Absolutely.
But I say this all the time. When I go home every time to Youngstown, Ohio, and I look at those factories, Youngstown is never going to be when my mom grew up in Youngstown, unless we get creative and we innovate. The steel mills I don't know if they're ever going to be back like they were, but it doesn't mean Youngstown doesn't get to be revitalized. And do we have the courage to do it?
Those same young men, they're consumers in this economy too. They have to buy things. They have to buy the stuff for their kids back to school, backpacks and the toys and all of that stuff. They are going to get hit by this long before any of those kinds of jobs
The
return.
problem is you can't consume your way to the American dream, right?
I get it,
we all
yeah.
agree on probably what the American dream is. Home ownership, health care is a big thing that the Republicans have no answer to. I fully admit that. Retirement and an education for your kids. And these things have just become astronomically expensive, especially if you're lower middle class, working class. The problem is that what we did was we made college the gatekeeper of the American dream, but our economy is already overproducing college grads by 50%. So half of college grads, actually I think that would make it 100%. Sorry, English major. Half of college grads are working in jobs that don't require a college degree. Meaning if we say...
With debt that they can't pay back, and then their salaries don't match to that.
So we have to find
What's your solution?
vocational training, tariffs, reshoring manufacturing.
But choice.
I want to respond to the question. I want to respond to the
Batia, you had everybody nodding at the table. And then you said tariffs.
On young men, we are seeing in some of the polling, the people who are most concerned about the tariffs are younger
So I
people.
wanna
who are
respond
listening.
to the-
We're very concerned about it.
we do have to.
Yeah, I can't stand people like her. She's trying to both sides everything. And you just can't. And Ashley again is right. These jobs are just not coming back. We're a different economy, right? We don't run our economy on horses anymore. Things change. The times change. We have to train people for the jobs we need today and the jobs in the future. And again, none of this means anything if Americans are lower class and middle class Americans are just paying too high of taxes. And the reason we pay high in taxes is because the super rich are not paying their fair share. At least that's the way I see it. It's clear to me that this country has more than enough wealth to go around. It's just concentrated to the very top. And she mentioned immigrants are pushing wages down. Like, are you effing kidding me? This is just a way to push blame from the super rich and push it to the poor. First off, if you want to grow the country and the economy, you need more people, not less. You need people to be paying taxes and paying into Social Security. Right? And also, immigrants come to this country primarily to do jobs that Americans just don't want to do, that just pay too little for the arduous task involved. And if you got rid of every single immigrant or undocumented immigrant, do you really think that increases wages? What would force the employer to want to increase the wages? But yeah, we're just changing an economy. To me, this is about education. It's about taking from the rich, not even taking, just making sure that they're paying their fair share. I have nothing against billionaires, super rich, multi-millionaires. All I care is that you get there fairly, just like the rest of us. You pay your fair share so that hopefully we can pay less. And if we're not going to pay less in taxes, at least you for sure should be paying your fair share, at least on a scale as to what we paying, not a fraction of it. This is just going to keep happening. I don't care how many jobs you bring to this country. But I'm going to leave it there. Guys, I know this was a super long video. I really appreciate it if you watched all the way through. But I thought this was a really good one. Touched on a lot of topics that we could discuss. Let me know what you think in the comments about all this. Disagree, agree with anything that I said or the panel. Please subscribe if you haven't. It really helps the channel. And I'll catch you in the next one.